My father set up a martial arts contest for me to choose a husband, and my exceptionally skilled childhood friend actually lost to a beggar from the streets. The crowd erupted in an uproar, with mocking laughter surging like a tide. A noble lady of the county, actually going to marry a beggar. My brother, standing nearby, pointed furiously at my childhood friend. You clearly held back just now. Why did you deliberately lose? Xie Zhaoyang slowly lifted his gaze. I lost because my skills were inferior, plain and simple. How could there be any talk of intention? When our eyes met, his gaze was filled with distance and detachment. In that single glance, I knew he had been reborn as well. It turned out that in this life, Xie Zhaoyang no longer wished to marry me. In that case, why should I continue to dwell on it? The next moment, I raised my hand and pointed at the beggar, who was dressed in rags yet stood tall and straight, speaking clearly. Since you have won the contest, you must honor the agreement. Next month at this time, come to the Earl's residence to propose marriage. As the words fell, amidst the surrounding uproar, Xie Zhaoyan's expression went blank for a moment. Shen Qingli, do you have any idea what you're saying? I gently adjusted my sleeves, my tone calm and unruffled. Of course I do. He seemed to have heard the biggest joke in the world, the corners of his lips curling into a mocking arc. You would marry a beggar just to spite me. I slowly lifted my gaze, my eyes falling upon the figure on the stage. The man's long hair was disheveled, almost covering most of his face. Even in tattered clothes, his tall and straight figure could not be concealed. The next second, my voice rang out clearly across the entire venue. A martial arts contest for marriage emphasizes fairness and justice. And what's more, the Earl's mansion has always valued its reputation. I paused slightly, meeting Xie Zhaoyan's complex and inscrutable gaze. Since this young master has won the competition, I should marry him as promised. What do you mean by acting out of spite? A soft click sounded. Xie Zhaoyang gently twisted his wrist, sheathed his sword, and suddenly darkened his expression. Qingli, don't be willful. Your uncle would never agree to such an absurd matter. I was about to speak when my gaze inadvertently caught a familiar figure outside the crowd. My half-sister Shen Shuyu was standing gracefully under the corridor, as if she happened to be passing by, but I know, she is the same as in the previous life. She was only here to confirm whether Xie Zhaoyang had won the match. Almost at the same time, Xie Zhaoyang also saw her. The moment their eyes met, the anxiety and anger he had felt because of me instantly vanished. Then it was replaced by an indescribable expression, a mixture of tenderness and delight. Seeing this, I immediately understood. So that's how it is. In a flash, memories from my past life surged over me like a tidal wave. Yes, in my previous life, after Xie Zhaoyang won the title of martial arts champion, the first thing he did was win the martial arts contest my father had set up for me to find a husband, and he married me with great fanfare. At that time, every noble lady in the capital envied me for having such a brilliant and talented husband. After our marriage, we also had times of mutual respect and harmony. In spring, we admired the blooming flowers, and in winter, we watched the falling snow. He taught me how to draw a bow, and I ground ink for him. I thought that such harmonious sweetness would be enough for us to stay together for life. However, in the third year of our marriage, Shen Shuyu, my half-sister who grew up with me, unexpectedly took poison and passed away overnight, leaving behind only a letter addressed to Xie Zhaoyang. The letter was filled with words written in blood and tears, each sentence expressing deeply suppressed love and despair. At that time, after reading it, Xie Zhaoyan's expression remained calm and unruffled. He silently brought the letter close to the candle flame and burned it to ashes. Seeing him like this, I didn't think much more of it. Unexpectedly, just a few days later, despite my imminent childbirth, he voluntarily requested to lead troops to the distant border thousands of miles away. By the time he returned victorious, it was already 2 years later. The infant in swaddling clothes has already begun to toddle, yet the warmth that once lingered in his eyes when he looked at me can no longer be found. To be fair, in the 20 years that followed, Xie Zhaoyang remained a husband beyond reproach. His career progressed smoothly, and his talents were fully displayed. Because of him, I was granted the title of a noblewoman at a young age. He never took a concubine. In the mansion, there were only me and the children. In the eyes of outsiders, he respected me, protected me, and gave me all the dignity befitting a legal wife. Even I gradually became deceived by this facade. Tell yourself that no matter how fervent the love of youth may be, by middle age, it will always settle into such a calm and respectful tranquility. Until the year he turned 40, he fell gravely ill and never recovered. In the final moments of his life, an old friend came to visit, held his hand, and asked if he had any regrets in this life. Holding our child's hand, I stood quietly outside the rose-colored silk curtain and heard him, with a faint breath yet clear and distinct words, lay bare the obsession he had buried for half a lifetime. I shouldn't have avoided her affection, nor should I have won that martial arts contest. As my thoughts gradually returned to the present, I saw Xie Zhaoyang quickly walking toward Shinshuyu, so in this lifetime, he would rather lose to a beggar in front of everyone than maintain our marriage bond, all to make up for the regrets from our previous life. It felt like an ice pick had brutally pierced through my heart. I tried my best to maintain a calm expression and clearly announce the match result, word by word. The martial arts contest to choose a husband has a winner. I, Shen Qingli, will keep my promise and marry this gentleman. With those words, he fell silent. My brother in the spectator seat suddenly looked at me, his voice urgent and sharp. Qingli, don't be foolish. He rushed to the front of the arena in a few steps. You are the legitimate daughter of the Earl's household, a county princess personally enfeoffed by the emperor. How can you casually marry a beggar of unknown origin? With that, he suddenly turned to Xie Zhaoyang, who had remained silent all along, and spoke with a livid expression. You grew up with my sister since childhood. And back then, you even vowed in front of everyone that you would marry no one but her. Today, you didn't give it your all and deliberately lost the match. Are you really going to stand by and watch her ruin her life out of spite? Xie Zhaoyang merely glanced up calmly upon hearing this. His gaze first swept casually over the crowd before finally settling on my face. His tone so calm it was almost cold. Uncle Shen would never agree to such an absurd marriage. He paused, a faint trace of mockery flickering at the corner of his lips. Moreover, the county princess's actions are merely a momentary impulse. She would never actually marry that beggar. As the words fell, Shinshuyu, standing beside Xie Zhaoyang, slightly lifted the corners of her lips, a trace of barely concealed pride flashing in her eyes, just as my brother was about to say something more. Beside them, Shinshuyu suddenly raised a delicate hand to her forehead and softly collapsed backward. Shuyu, Xie Zhaoyan's face suddenly changed, his previous composure vanishing in an instant. Amid the uproar from the crowd, he scooped up the pretending to faint Shinshuyu in his arms. He strode away without looking back. I stared at his resolute departing figure, my heart feeling as if it were being squeezed by an invisible hand. The crowd had dispersed, leaving only a mess around the vast arena. I turned around and, for the first time, truly took in the man who had remained silent the entire time. His clothes were tattered, his hair disheveled and covering his face, with only the sharp line of his chin clearly visible. I asked softly, "What is your name?" Logically speaking, if he could defeat dozens of people in a row, I should have had some impression of him in my previous life. Yet no matter how hard I searched my memories, I couldn't find the slightest trace of him. The man's parched lips parted slightly, and his voice came out hoarse but exceptionally cold. I didn't join this martial arts contest to marry you. This sentence left me stunned on the spot. He continued in an unemotional tone, before I came, I heard that Xie Zhao was your childhood sweetheart. I originally planned to defeat him publicly, then offer 50 taels of silver as a condition to give up the right to marry you. I froze for a moment, the corner of my mouth twitching uncontrollably. So, you're only doing this for the money? Yes, he answered crisply. A nameless fury instantly surged in my heart. I, Shen Qingli, have been well versed in poetry and literature since childhood, proficient in music, chess, calligraphy, and painting. Though I dare not claim my beauty to be unparalleled under heaven, it has certainly made me renowned throughout the capital. The men on Chang'an Street who wished to marry me could form a line stretching from the Vermilion Bird Gate all the way to the Mingda Gate, and now, I am actually being looked down upon by a beggar. A mix of competitiveness and humiliation churned within me. I sneered coldly, had the maid bring a few silver notes, and threw them directly at his chest. Since you've won the competition, you don't get to choose. With these 100 taels, I'm buying you to obediently become my fiancé. The man lowered his gaze to look at the silver notes fluttering to the ground, his figure unmoving, under the disheveled hair. I could barely make out his expression. All I could hear was a faint, derisive chuckle. Is the county princess trying to buy me? He slowly raised his eyes, and through the tangled strands of hair, I met a pair of unfathomably deep eyes. There is no greed, no humility there, only a silent expanse of ink-black darkness, 100 tales. To buy a beggar as a fiancé, the county princess is truly generous. His low, hoarse voice carried an indescribable meaning. The man did not bend down to pick up the silver notes. Instead, he took a step forward. As he drew closer, a faint, crisp scent of cold pine drifted over. It was completely at odds with his tattered appearance. He leaned in slightly, bringing his lips close to my ear. His voice lowered to a whisper. "County princess, are you truly willing to marry a penniless beggar like me?" "Naturally, you don't regret it." "No regrets." The air froze for a moment. The man seemed to let out a light laugh, then bent down again to pick up the banknotes scattered on the ground. As he moved, his tattered sleeve slipped down, revealing a lean and sinewy wrist with a prominent old scar running across it. Under my astonished gaze, he slowly and deliberately folded the banknote and gently tucked it back into my hand. "Your ladyship should keep this money for yourself." Just as I thought he was about to turn and leave, he spoke in a low voice. "Wait for me. In half a month, I will surely come to the Earl's mansion to propose marriage." When I returned to the mansion, I was met with an angry roar. "Ungrateful daughter. As the legitimate daughter of the Earl's mansion, you actually declared publicly that you want to marry a beggar, completely disgracing your father's reputation." Father stood with his hands behind his back in front of the hall. His face ashen with rage. Seeing me lower my gaze in silence, he suddenly flicked his sleeve and said coldly, "Today, Zhao Yang deliberately lost the match, clearly showing he has no intention of marrying you. Since that's the case, I will go to the Marquis's residence tomorrow and finalize his marriage with your sister. In the future, I will also find you a good husband." I raised my eyes and replied with a forced smile, "Very well, father, go ahead and try. Let's see whose words carry more weight, yours or the Empress Dowager's golden decree." He pointed at me, furious but suddenly speechless. I clearly remember the Empress Dowager's birthday banquet 2 years ago. I risked my life to take that knife for her, touched by my sacrifice. The Empress Dowager publicly promised to grant me one wish, vowing to fulfill it whenever I needed. So, as long as I refuse to agree, the marriage between Xie Zhaoyang and Shen Shuyu is absolutely impossible. Shen Shuyu beside her began to sob at the right moment, tears rolling down her cheeks, yet her eyes were filled with seething resentment. "Sister, since Brother Iron no longer has feelings for you, why must you keep pushing and refuse to let us be together?" I let out a cold laugh. "Let you be together? It's not entirely impossible. My father has always been one to prioritize profit, in my past life. The reason he was so pleased with the marriage between me and Xie Zhaoyang was simply because he saw the benefits of an alliance with the Marquis's household. Now that Xie Zhaoyang has publicly abandoned me, I am no longer of value. Given his opportunistic nature, it's entirely possible that he would casually marry me off to some Zhong or Li who could bring benefits to the family, all in exchange for new gains. In his eyes, my lifelong happiness likely holds less weight than a land deed or a favor." At this thought, I turned to him and said, "Word by word, as long as you put it in writing, pledging that from now on you will no longer interfere in my marriage, whether I marry a chicken, a dog, or a beggar on the street, it will no longer be any of your concern, you unfilial daughter." Father flew into a rage and raised his hand to slap me, but unexpectedly, Shen Shuyu, who was standing nearby, held him back tightly. "Father, please agree to sister's request," she pleaded tearfully, her eyes brimming with tears. "I truly love Brother Iron." The weighing of options happens in an instant. The scales of interest ultimately tipped. He compromised. The cold laughter in my heart grew even deeper. Yes. It wasn't until my previous life, when I too became a mother, that I truly understood, there really are fathers in this world who can feel no love at all for their own children. A few days later, as the Empress Dowager was seriously ill, I entered the palace to pay her a visit. As dusk fell and I stepped out of the palace gate, a familiar figure blocked my path. The scent of sandalwood drifted on the wind even without looking up. I knew who it was. Qing Li. Xie Zhaoyan's voice was low, carrying an unmistakable certainty. "You've returned as well, haven't you?" I lowered my gaze, staring at the trembling bead embroidery on the tip of my shoe, and did not respond. He took a step forward. his shadow looming over me. In our past life, we were married for 20 years. I dare say I never treated you with anything less than my utmost sincerity, but since you know Shuyu is the deepest pain in my heart, why must you insist on this in this lifetime? I suddenly looked up, meeting his somber gaze, a mocking curve blooming at the corner of my lips. I'm pestering you. There's no need for you to keep pretending, he spoke with certainty. Didn't you enter the palace today precisely to use the wish the Empress Dowager granted you back then, to ask her to bestow a marriage between you and me? I nearly laughed out loud. Where did you get such confidence? Xie Zhaoyang stared at me, suddenly reaching out to grab my wrist, his tone urgent. I can promise you, just like in our previous life, I will bring you into the mansion. His voice paused slightly, as if he had made some kind of resolution. But the position of the principal wife must be reserved for Shuyu. This is what I owe her. I abruptly shook off his hand, the last trace of warmth in my eyes completely fading away. I'll tell you one last time, who you love, who you marry, who you make your principal wife, none of it has anything to do with me. In this lifetime, I will absolutely not marry you again. After saying this, I boarded the Shen family's carriage without a single look back. The carriage curtain fell, cutting off the sight of Xie Zhaoyan's hesitant, unspoken words. The carriage moved slowly, and as I leaned against the soft cushion, my fingertips touched the corner of my eye, only to find it damp and cold. It turns out that some pains, even after being given a second chance at life, remain deeply etched in the heart. In my previous life, because of Shen Shuyu's death, he insisted on volunteering to go to the distant frontier even after learning that I was about to give birth. For over 1,000 days and nights, I endured countless heartaches and helplessness alone in the vast Marquis estate. Even on the day of giving birth, with one foot already in the grave, there was no one by my side. I could only clutch the quilt tightly. The irony is, after a lifetime of toiling to manage the Marquis's household in perfect order, all I received in return was his dying words, I shouldn't have won that martial contest. The sound of carriage wheels rolling over the cobblestone road jolted me out of my memories. I wiped away my tears and slowly straightened up. Outside the window was the familiar vermilion gate of the Shen residence, with a maidservant holding a lantern waiting on the steps. In this life, those sleepless nights and endless tears shed for Xie Zhaoyang will no longer exist. After Xie Zhaoyang and Shen Shuyu's marriage was settled, both households began bustling with preparations. A few days later, Xie Zhaoyang specifically sought me out, saying he wanted to take Shuyu to Jiangnan for a short stay. Before their departure, he handed me a thick dowry list. Shuyu's mother passed away early, just like yours. His tone was flat, yet each word pierced like a needle. As her elder sister and someone who has experienced marriage, you should take more care in arranging things for her. I nearly laughed in disbelief. Are you asking me to personally prepare her dowry? On what grounds? Xie Zhaoyang stood with his hands behind his back, his gaze carrying a warning. If you still harbor any thoughts of entering the Xie residence, do not make things difficult for Shuyu at every turn. Before the words had even finished, I raised my hand and tore the dowry list in two. Shreds of paper fluttered down like falling petals. Xie Zhaoyan's face darkened abruptly, his patience worn thin. Tomorrow, I will set off for Jiangnan with Shuyu, upon my return in half a month. If I find you still haven't made the arrangements, he turned, his sleeves fluttering, leaving behind an ultimatum. Our engagement ends here. Xie Zhaoyang lingered in Jiangnan with Shen Shuyu for a month before finally setting off back to the capital. Along the way, the misty rain, painted bridges, wind-blown curtains, and emerald screens were all part of the uniquely gentle scenery of Jiangnan. One day while gazing at the rain from the boat, Xie Zhaoyang suddenly remembered that in his past life, Shen Qingli had also pleaded with him in such a soft tone, hoping to travel to Jiangnan with him, but at that time, Shuyu had just passed away, and he was disheartened, repeatedly refusing her with the excuse of being overwhelmed with official duties. After that, she never brought it up again. On the day they set off to return to the capital, Xie Zhaoyang felt an inexplicable tightness in his heart and suddenly longed to see Shen Qingli immediately, childhood friends for over a decade. He had to admit that there was still a lingering affection for her in his heart that was hard to let go of. Thinking about how he had spent the past month traveling with Shuyu, leaving her alone in the capital, given her temperament, he couldn't help but wonder how deeply saddened she must have been. As soon as he returned to the capital, Xie Zhaoyang didn't even go back to the Marquis's residence but instead rode straight to the Shun residence. Who would have thought that as soon as I stepped into the courtyard, I was captivated by the scene inside. The hall was adorned with red silk, along with satin, jewelry, and bundles of silk with jade ornaments. Each item was priceless. Xie Zhaoyang was momentarily stunned, then the corners of his lips lifted slightly. It seems Qing Li not only knows her mistake but has also prepared Shu Yu's dowry with such grandeur and thoroughness. He knew, this is her bowing her head to me. When Xie Zhaoyang entered the mansion with Shu Yu, I was sitting upright in the hall, flipping through the account books. Qing Li, you've put in a lot of effort. Xie Zhaoyang stepped forward, his gaze sweeping over the hall filled with chests and boxes. In his usually cold eyes, there was a rare flicker of something almost gentle. Beside him, Shu Yu looked at the dazzling splendor filling the room, unable to conceal the pride on her face. Brother Iron, it seems sister really took your words to heart. Xie Zhaoyang curved his lips slightly, not denying it. Shu Yu couldn't wait to step forward, reaching out to take a jade hairpin from an open chest. The hairpin glowed with a soft radiance between her fingertips, and Shu Yu couldn't put it down, letting out a soft sigh of admiration. Such fine ice jadeite, I've never seen anything like it outside the palace. With that, she began inspecting the chests filled with rare treasures as if she were already the mistress of the house. I closed the ledger and slowly stood up, positioning myself between her and the next trunk. Shu Yu frowned with displeasure, her eyes still wandering toward the trunks behind me. Her shifting gaze was filled with nothing but greed. I spoke abruptly, these are not for you. Shu Yu's hand froze mid-air, her expression shifting from smugness to shame and anger. Qing Li, what do you mean? Exactly what I said. You, her face instantly flushed crimson, her voice suddenly sharpening. I knew you had ulterior motives. These dowries must have been prepared for yourself. And you still have the audacity to cling to brother Yang. Xie Zhaoyang also stepped forward with a furrowed brow. Qing Li, what do you mean by this? Meeting my gaze. He instinctively took a step back, as if afraid I would cling to him. I've already made myself clear. His tone deepened, carrying a note of warning. If you still wish to enter the Xie family, do not trouble Shu Yu any further. Fulfill your duty as the elder sister and properly prepare her dowry. I met his gaze, my eyes calm and unwavering, speaking each word clearly. Xie Zhaoyang, I will say this one last time. I have never once considered marrying you again. As for these. My gaze swept over the room full of chests and boxes. They are my betrothal gifts, and have nothing to do with you. The air suddenly grew still. After a moment of deathly silence, Xie Zhaoyang let out a low chuckle. Betrothal gifts, Qing Li, don't tell me, these things were sent to you by that beggar from back then. Meeting Xie Zhaoyang's mocking gaze, my fingers curled slightly, and I was momentarily at a loss for words. At dawn yesterday, dozens of sturdy servants dressed in black martial attire carried these chests to the Shun residence, stating only that they were betrothal gifts from their young master. As for his name, they refused to say. I had a vague premonition that these betrothal gifts were likely connected to the beggar who had won the martial arts contest that day. But what exactly was his identity? To think there is such a move. Seeing me at a loss for words, Xie Zhaoyang thought he had hit upon my concerns. And his expression immediately became somewhat arrogant. Qing Li, there should be a limit to your anger with me. I suddenly felt utterly disinterested and turned to leave. Exchanging even one more word with such a person would be futile. Just at that moment, a servant approached holding a brocade box and said respectfully, "Second miss, this is the dowry that the master specifically added for you." Shu Yu's face lit up with joy, and she eagerly opened the brocade box. When I clearly saw the translucent and lustrous mutton fat jade bracelet inside the box, it felt as if all the blood in my body instantly froze. That was the only keepsake my mother left behind. Give it back to me. I rushed forward abruptly. Shu Yu, however, darted behind Xie Zhaoyang like a startled rabbit, clutching the jade bracelet tightly as tears welled up in her eyes. This was given to me by father. Surely you're not going to snatch it away too, sister. I reached out to pull her from behind him, but before my fingers could even touch her sleeve, Xie Zhaoyang shoved me away. He stood protectively in front of Shu Yu, his brow furrowed deeply. It's just a bracelet, and Shu Yu is your sister too. Is this really necessary? I was pushed by him and stumbled. Almost falling, Xie Zhaoyang instinctively reached out to help, But I had already steadied myself. Taking advantage of his distraction, I grabbed Shinshuyu, who was behind him. I took a deep breath, trying hard to suppress the anger in my chest, and extended my hand in front of her. "Give the bracelet back to me." Shinshuyu stared at me intently, a barely noticeable cold smile curling at the corner of her lips. "Sister, since you want it so badly," as she spoke, she slowly extended the bracelet toward me. Just as my fingertips were about to touch it, her fingers imperceptibly loosened their grip. Crack! The jade bracelet fell straight onto the bluestone floor, instantly shattering into several pieces. That crisp sound felt like a sharp knife stabbing deep into my heart. I stared blankly at the scattered jade fragments on the ground, and my mother's voice and smile suddenly flooded my mind. Overwhelming rage and sorrow instantly drowned out all reason. I grabbed Shinshuyu by the hair and raised my hand once more. Enough! My wrist was seized with immense force. Xie Zhaoyan's face was as dark as storm clouds. His eyes filled with disappointment and anger. Seeing this, Shinshuyu seized the opportunity to raise her hand and slap me across the face. A searing pain instantly exploded, and a buzzing sound filled my ears. Instinctively, I covered my cheek, looking at Xie Zhaoyan in disbelief. Tears welled up in my eyes without warning, instantly blurring my vision. When Xie Zhaoyan saw my reddened, tear-filled eyes, he immediately loosened his grip on my right hand in a fluster. His Adam's apple bobbed. His voice hoarse. "I didn't mean to." With that, he instinctively took a step forward, reaching out to check my injury, but I shoved him away harshly. "Get out." His pride instantly wounded, his expression darkened. The flicker of guilt that had just surfaced was quickly replaced by displeasure, and he resumed his condescending demeanor. "Qingli, how much longer are you going to keep this up? After all, both you and Shuyu will eventually enter the Xie household. Do you really intend to be at each other's throats every single day from now on? As the elder sister, shouldn't it be your duty to yield to your younger sister a little?" A surge of anger suddenly flared up in my heart, just as I was about to raise my hand to return that slap. A stern and authoritative roar erupted from behind me. "You rebellious daughter, stop this at once." Father was dressed in court attire, clearly having just returned from the morning court session. His face was livid as he pointed at me and Shinshuyu, fighting openly in broad daylight. "What kind of behavior is this? Shen Qingli, have you no dignity left as the legitimate daughter?" I turned my head sharply, my crimson eyes piercing straight at him, the years of pent-up grievances and resentment erupting completely at this moment. "Dignity? And what about you? How dare you casually give my mother's keepsake to the child born of your concubine?" I pointed at the shattered fragments of the jade bracelet on the ground, my voice trembling with extreme anger. "Misappropriating your deceased wife's dowry to fill your illegitimate daughter's private coffers. What kind of family head are you? What kind of man are you?" As the words fell, Xie Zhaoyan, standing nearby, froze in place and murmured something almost inaudibly. "Is this your mother's keepsake?" I ignored him and looked at my father with a resentful expression. "If you dare to use my mother's keepsake without permission again, I won't hesitate to confront you in court. Unfilial daughter, shut your mouth." He seemed to have been struck in a sore spot, flying into a rage, and raised his hand to slap me across the face. I closed my eyes, preparing to endure the blow. However, the expected pain never came. I opened my eyes in astonishment, only to see a tall, straight figure standing in front of me like a pine tree. The man slowly turned his head, and upon seeing his deep eyes and sharp, cold features, my pupils contracted abruptly. I let out a low, incredulous gasp. "It's you." The man raised an eyebrow slightly at me. "Didn't you, Miss Shen, offer me 100 taels to marry you? I'm here to fulfill the agreement." "Absurd." Xie Zhaoyan abruptly pulled me behind him, stepping forward to stand between me and the man. "Are you the beggar from that day? Do you realize what kind of nonsense you're spouting? Do you really think someone like you is worthy of marrying the legitimate daughter of an earl's household?" Before his words had even fully faded, a dull thud echoed from the side. I saw my father, his face as pale as paper, had already fallen straight to his knees, his voice trembling uncontrollably. "Why, your humble servant pays respects to His Highness the Crown Prince." "What, the Crown Prince?" Xie Zhaoyan's entire body stiffened, suddenly remembering something, and he sharply turned his head to look at the man of extraordinary bearing beside him. His voice changed with shock. You are the fourth prince, Song Sui, who was just appointed as the heir by His Majesty, Song Sui neither confirmed nor denied it, only slightly raising an eyebrow. Halfway down the mountain, Xie Zhaoyang took a deep breath, his face drained of color, and finally knelt down on one knee, his voice strained. "Greetings, Your Highness the Crown Prince." Song Sui paid no attention to the two of them, instead walking directly up to me, his slender fingers gently lifting my chin. My heart tightened, and I instinctively tried to dodge, but his fingers held me firmly in place with an undeniable force. When his fingertip touched my swollen, burning cheek, I let out a soft hiss of pain. Song Sui's gaze sharpened, and the gentle aura around him instantly turned cold and rigid. "If anyone dares to bully you again, pay them back double." Understood. Why do these words sound so familiar? I stared at him in a daze, a complex mix of emotions surging in my chest. There was satisfaction, confusion, and an indescribable tremor. As soon as Song Sui's gaze swept over, several black-armored guards moved forward like phantoms, forcibly lifting Shen Shuyu without a word and pressing her down to her knees. "No, no, father, brother Iron, save me." The sharp sound of slaps, mixed with Shen Shuyu's cries, echoed one after another in the deathly silent courtyard. Xie Zhaoyang abruptly tried to stand up, but his father, whose face was ashen, firmly held his arm, leaving him unable to move. That day when I entered the palace to visit the Empress Dowager, I finally learned the truth. It turned out that Song Sui was the son of a deceased palace maid. During the Emperor's critical illness, he was sent away from the palace on a secret mission, only to be ambushed by assassins dispatched by his own brothers. Severely injured, he had no choice but to disguise himself as a beggar to hide his identity and blend into the common folk. The Empress Dowager lay on her chaise lounge, gently holding my hand. "This child, the hardships he endured in the palace before are beyond your imagination. I can see that he has put a lot of thought into you, otherwise he wouldn't have risked having his identity exposed just to win that martial arts contest for marriage that day." She suddenly remembered something, and a gentle smile appeared at the corner of her lips. "By the way, I just recalled that the two of you actually met once when you were children." The Empress Dowager's words were like a key, suddenly unlocking long-buried memories. I suddenly remembered that when I was young, I once followed my mother into the palace to visit the Empress. Under the plum tree in the back garden, I happened to see a group of children in fine clothes bullying a thin, weak boy. They forced him to kneel by the frozen pond and threw stones at him. At that time, my mother was still alive. She held me in the palm of her hand, spoiled me beyond measure, and my temperament grew increasingly unruly. Seeing this, I imitated the chivalrous heroes from the picture books who stand up for justice. I confronted the group of children head-on and eventually drove them away. I then took off my newly acquired crimson cloak and wrapped it tightly around the boy, whose lips were purple from the cold. "If anyone bullies you again, make sure to pay them back double." Understood. My chest suddenly throbbed, leaving me somewhat numb. So, that little boy turned out to be Song Sui. Therefore, his appearance on the platform that day was not at all for the 50 taels of silver as he had claimed. It was for me. The Empress Dowager's inadvertent sigh allowed me to glimpse another side of that storm. No wonder the court had been filled with unpredictable changes recently, and even my usually tactful father was trembling with fear all day long. It turned out that the third prince and the fifth prince had completely torn apart over the succession, ultimately leaving both sides wounded. After the emperor regained consciousness, he realized that the position of crown prince could no longer remain vacant, lest it destabilize the court. Finally, Song Sui was elevated to the position of crown prince. The sandalwood burned quietly in the gilded incense burner, its blue smoke curling upward. The Empress Dowager gently stroked her teacup, her gaze seemingly sweeping past my face as if by chance. "They say when the snipe and the clam grapple, it's the fisherman who profits. If no one throws a stone into this tranquil pond of the imperial city at the right moment, how could ripples strong enough to stir the current situation ever appear?" She smiled faintly, her eyes revealing a knowing clarity. "I always knew this child, deep down, is the one who most resembles his father." My heart skipped a beat, and in an instant, I understood. There was no such thing as fate or coincidence. The true mastermind behind the conflict that completely exhausted the two princes was likely none other than Song Sui, who appeared to remain aloof from worldly affairs. But these matters were not for me to pry into. I could only lower my gaze, pretending not to understand the deeper meaning in her words, and hastily excused myself, until I reached the palace gate. I looked up and saw a familiar figure standing quietly beside the carriage. Song Sui stood with his hands behind his back, as if he had long anticipated my arrival at this moment. He looked at me, a faint smile playing on his lips, and reached out his hand toward me. "I'll walk you home." I lowered my gaze to that distinctly bony hand, fully aware that the person before me was far from the gentle appearance he presented. He was even dangerous, yet, as if bewitched, I still placed my hand in his palm. When our palms touched, he slipped his fingers between mine, interlocking them tightly. Just as I had imagined, his hand was broad and warm. Suddenly, I was no longer afraid, at least in this moment. I believed that the man before me would never hurt me. The Empress Dowager's birthday banquet was attended by all officials along with their families. As a concubine-born daughter, Shen Shuyu originally had no right to attend, but she was granted an exception because she was Xie Zhaoyan's fiancée. The music temporarily ceased, and it was time for the younger generation to present their talents. Shen Shuyu was the first to rise, dressed in magnificent rainbow robes. She made an elegant bow to the Empress Dowager. "This humble maiden wishes to present a dance in celebration of your Majesty's birthday." Her gaze swept over Xie Zhaoyang, carrying a pride that was determined to win. However, not long after she began to dance, perhaps due to her eagerness, she lost her footing during a step that should have been light and graceful. Though she tried hard to conceal it, her unsteady posture drew a few suppressed chuckles from the audience. Instantly thrown into disarray, her subsequent dance moves became completely disorganized. After hastily finishing her performance, she retreated to her seat with a pale face. When it was my turn to take the stage, Shen Shuyu's resentful gaze never left me. The dance I performed for the Empress Dowager is titled Graceful Swan. As the water sleeves fluttered, the entire audience fell silent. Just as I spun around, Shen Shuyu, seated among the guests, suddenly raised her hand and quietly snapped the pearl necklace around her neck. Round pearls instantly scattered and rolled across the floor. As my toes touched the smooth beads, I suddenly slipped. When our eyes met, Shen Shuyu curled his lips triumphantly. In that split second, I leaned forward with the momentum, my water sleeves sweeping over the floor like flowing clouds, executing a perfectly timed waist bend. Then, I lightly tapped my toes to avoid the string of beads, immediately followed by 3 rapid spins. This series of movements flowed as smoothly as clouds and water, as if it were originally part of the dance. The hall fell silent for a moment, then erupted with thunderous applause. The smug expression on Shen Shuyu's face had not yet faded when it froze in place. To avoid arousing suspicion, she hurriedly knelt and prostrated herself on the ground, her voice trembling. "I deserve 10,000 deaths. This necklace." This necklace suddenly broke for some reason, disturbing the Empress Dowager's birthday banquet. I begged the Empress Dowager for forgiveness. The Empress Dowager glanced down at her, her gaze as still as ancient well water, neither reprimanding her nor telling her to rise. Then, turning to me, she clapped her hands lightly and smiled, the fine lines at the corners of her eyes brimming with admiration. "Excellent. Remaining calm in the face of danger truly reveals one's character." I lowered my head and smiled shyly. A nearby official, who had long been at odds with my father, stroked his beard and chuckled softly, his voice quiet but loud enough for those around to hear. "Lord Shen, your 2 daughters are truly like, one being the bright moon in the sky, and the other, well, as different as heaven and earth." All the guests present were astute individuals, who couldn't see that the breaking of the pearl was suspicious. The Empress Dowager's attitude had made everything clear. Not exposing the truth was the greatest act of grace, yet also the greatest humiliation. Father's face instantly turned ashen, yet he had no way to refute it, and could only force an awkward smile. Xie Zhaoyang, standing nearby, seemed completely oblivious to everything happening around him. He held a wine glass in his hand, his gaze firmly fixed on me. Midway through the banquet, I slipped away alone to the back garden for some fresh air. The night breeze was cool, yet it couldn't dispel the heaviness in my heart. Familiar footsteps sounded behind me, and Xie Zhaoyan's voice seemed especially deep under the moonlight. "You danced very well just now." I did not turn my head, my voice calm and steady. "Thank you, young Marquis." He remained silent for a moment, then took out a familiar bamboo flute from his sleeve. It was the one I had personally made for him on his birthday last year. His tone carried a hint of hesitation. Qing Li. Could you dance for me alone once more, just like before? Impossible. These 3 words were spoken with resounding finality. Xie Zhaoyan's face gradually paled, yet he still clung to a sliver of hope. I don't believe you have not a shred of affection left for me. He took a step forward, his voice tinged with panic. Qing Li, if I told you that the one I've always loved in my heart is you, would you believe me? I only feel guilty towards Shuyu. Afraid she might do something foolish again in this lifetime, which is why I thought of marrying her for the time being. But now I understand that doing so will only push you further away. His eyes reddened. I regret it. Can you not marry the crown prince? Let's stay together for a lifetime. Just like we did in our previous life. Alright, I felt like I had heard the biggest joke of all time. Spend a lifetime together. I forcefully shook off Xie Zhaoyan's attempt to hold my hand. My chest heaving violently. Although I tried my best to steady my emotions, my voice still carried an uncontrollable sob. In your previous life, you kept saying you felt guilty towards Shuyu. But did you ever think about how much more you owed your wife and child? Do you have any idea how difficult it was for me to raise Nyana all alone after you abandoned us and went to the border, when he caught a cold and had a high fever that wouldn't break? He kept crying and calling for his father, until the very end. That child couldn't understand why his own father never wanted to look at him more than once from the moment he was born. Tears blurred my vision as I stared directly at his suddenly pale face. Xie Zhaoyang, you are nothing but a complete and utter scoundrel. You are always chasing what you can't have, and you never learn to cherish the person right in front of you. Loving you once was me being blind. As the words fell, Xie Zhaoyang felt as if struck by lightning. After stumbling for a moment, he collapsed to the ground with vacant eyes. As if all his strength had been drained, a familiar soft call came from the distance. Qing Li. Song Sui stood holding a lamp, his black cloak fluttering gently in the wind. Without hesitation, I walked toward him, not giving another glance to the person behind me. On the day of my wedding, I wore a phoenix crown and ceremonial robes, and the hall was filled with joyous red. The maid was helping me get ready to go out when suddenly there was a commotion outside the door. Xie Zhaoyang, clad in military attire, barged in, his armor still damp with morning dew. I instinctively took half a step back and looked at him warily. What do you want? Yet he just stood there, his gaze greedily lingering on my wedding dress, his eyes bloodshot. Qing Li, his voice was terribly hoarse. You look just as beautiful in the wedding dress as you did before. He smiled bitterly, a glimmer of tears seeming to flash in the corner of his eyes. It's just a pity that this time, I'm not the groom. Seeing that I was still on guard, he took a deep breath and slowly took half a step back, creating some distance between us. I'm sorry. These 3 words seemed to drain all his strength. For my past arrogance, for the hurt I caused you, for everything. His gaze swept over my eyes and brows one last time, as if wanting to etch this moment into his heart. May you from now on, be safe and joyful, with children gathered around your knees. With that, he resolutely turned away, the clanking of his armor gradually fading into the celebratory sounds of gongs and drums. I watched that receding, stumbling figure and suddenly remembered my previous life. It was also a night with tall red candles burning brightly, holding the wedding scale. He gently lifted my phoenix and dragon bridal veil. The candlelight flickered in his smiling eyes as he said, Qing Li, I, Xie Zhaoyang, will never let you down in this lifetime. The sincerity in his eyes at that moment, and the desolation of his departure now, intertwined under the glow of the red silk drapes, weaving a dream that felt like a lifetime away. Just as in the previous life, Xie Zhaoyang volunteered to lead troops to garrison the border, never to return to the capital. Shuyu was unwilling to endure a hard life with him in the frontier, so she broke off their engagement. Her father arranged another marriage for her, this time with the second son of the Duke of Zhengguo's family. However, given Shuyu's status as a child of a concubine, she could only become a concubine herself. I heard that the legal wife was quite formidable in her methods. After Shuyu entered the household, she was tormented every day. In less than a month, she was crying and begging her father to bring her back home. Although her father had once favored her, when it came to real interests, he ultimately chose to stand by and do nothing, leaving her to fend for herself in the vast rear residence. Time flows, dynasties change. The once glorious Earl's mansion gradually fell into ruin. Later, my father was stripped of his title for being involved in a corruption case in the canal transport system. That day, heavy snow fell as he staggered and knelt on the long steps outside the Eastern Palace, his graying hair covered in frost. The palace attendant held an umbrella to shield me from the snow, whispering that he had been kneeling in the snow for 3 hours. I stood beneath the corridor, gazing at the figure curled up in the wind and snow. I remembered how he had insisted on bringing his mistress into the mansion while my mother lay ill on her sickbed, and how he casually gave away her belongings to his illegitimate daughter, how he stood by indifferently during my most difficult times. Finally, I left without looking back, leaving behind the words disappear. After I married Song Sui, we supported each other, deeply in love and devoted. After he ascended the throne, he left the 6 palaces empty, standing by my side alone. Many years later, on a snowy night, with the candlelight flickering, he gently took my hand after reviewing the final memorial. Qingli, his voice was low and deep. In fact, in my previous life, I too had once stood beneath the arena. My fingertips trembled slightly as I looked at him in disbelief, but at that time, I was too weak. I could only watch as you wore the phoenix crown and ceremonial robes for him, watch as you shed tears alone in the deep courtyard. His palm was warm, carefully enveloping my slightly cold fingers. So in this life, I swear I will make you happy. I looked into his still clear eyes and smiled as I returned his grasp. You did it. Outside the window, the snow fell silently. Inside the hall, time stood still and peaceful. In this lifetime, we ultimately did not let each other down.